Bing, 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 bing.
You are making the world a better place by listening to the Joy of Living podcast. This is your guide to achieving a more purposeful, powerful, and positive life. Join Barry Shore in unlocking the best version of you and becoming happier, healthier, and wealthier. And now, here's your ambassador of joy, Barry Shore.
Yay! We did it. I love that intro.
Yeah, great.
Remember,
It's a very motivating intro.
You're always looking for and finding the good. We are in the midst of good with something called Divorce with Integrity, DWI. It's quite amazing putting these words together and to unlock and uncover the power and the secrets of what it means to be in love, get married, get divorced, and do it with love and integrity for each other. Because if we can do this, we can save our country and the world. Because really, that's where everything happens. It's the nub of the issue between two adult beings living with integrity for each other and the other, and recognizing that what they do makes a difference to their children, to the other extended family, and by definition, to the entire world. I mean, I'm not putting a big burden on anybody, but it's true. What you do in the divorce proceedings literally will affect generations to come. And we have, as a part of our amazing panel, and by the way, you should know, wonderful Lori and Joe and Esty will be joining us in a few minutes because she has carpool issues, that people by the thousands are responding to this podcast. Because we're touching a nerve. Let's be blunt. Hello, we're touching a nerve. This is something that people want to know about. They would like to understand or even believe that divorce with integrity is possible. And thus far, even in the couple of sessions that we've done together, people are beginning to understand that it is not only true, but necessary. Both of those words are vital, true and necessary. I'm just going to do a quick introduction of the people who don't need any introduction. That's wonderful Lori and Joe will introduce us in just a moment. But I'm going to say a brief intro, and then they'll say something when they come on specifically. Lori McDermott, a dear friend, she is known as the wife expert because she is. She had to go through it herself to understand all the difficulties that are inherent in the fraying of a marriage, and yet able to recover it and re-sow and rekindle a love for not just her husband and herself, but for family and friends and all living beings. Joe Applebaum is a remarkably successful, highly, I was going to say sexed, but I don't want to say that. I mean highly sexed in the most giving way. I mean, this is not Kundalini yoga, that type of thing. Highly sexed, networking individual who literally thrives on life, which is what sex is all about, is really thriving on life. And he was married for a number of years and in a very religious setting, and it happens to be religious Orthodox Judaism. And he's a proud parent of 5 children, as is his now divorced wife. So they share custody of 5 children, which is not a small number in today's world. And Esty, I believe, also has either 4 or 5 or 6.
He has 5.
5. Okay, so 5 and 5. And Lori has 3. And Barry, who was married 45 years, has 1. But Barry has 1 son who is in the process of going through a divorce, which is very painful. But we'll talk about that maybe.
How many kids does your son have, Barry?
I'm sorry?
How many children does your son have?
Have I chosen what?
How many children does your son have?
2 boys, 2 young boys,
2
a
boys.
5-year-old and a 2.5, which is very fascinating, of course, because everything that we've heard so far is that the 5-year-old is confused trying to understand what it means that Abba or Daddy's not here and what's going on. But the 2.5 is blissful. I mean, he's a 2.5. He doesn't know anything. So that on some level, that's very good. Ignorance is bliss, I guess. In this case, he's proving it. So, and they are living, my daughter-in-law, wonderful daughter-in-law, I really love, living with her parents. So that's an interesting dilemma also about going, people saying kids are going back and living with their parents. So in this case, they're doing it oftentimes because of divorce. So I just want to mention here that, again, this is a divorce with integrity. You've tuned in consciously and conscientiously because you know that on this show we touch that which is most important to you, which is real life. You see, part of what happens, and we've discussed actually in the past couple of shows, is that oftentimes people weren't dealing with real life. In other words, stuff was happening in their life. People go through motions. I love you, you love me. We kiss each other goodnight and hug or do something, whatever we do. And we think that life is just going along until some one day or one moment or something, and life is shattered or pulled apart. And that issue of dealing with the D word, which comes right after the C word, people are frightened of cancer. D is actually as frightening, if not more so, because you really have to deal with it. Cancer, you can sort of feel bad. People pat you on the head. Everybody commiserates with you. Divorce is a little more interesting, a little more scary on that level. So I want to tell both Joe and Lori up front, and when Esty comes in just a couple of minutes, I was flooded with questions. And the questions really are around two areas. And I'm going to make them very broad, and then we're going to go deep dive into them. The first one, again, because we're dealing with divorce, and oftentimes people with children, not always, but oftentimes with children, the questions are arising around two. One is vaccination, or put it this way, medical issues dealing with children. And the second has to do with completely different question about remarrying. So they're two different questions, yet obviously they both impinge upon this particular issue. So I'm just going to reframe one of the questions, which came, I'd say, about 89 of them. 89 questions, all revolving around the same issue, because everybody knows that in this particular moment, we're in the year 2022. So if you're tuning in a century from now, you can hear back and say, wow, last century, I remember they had something called a pandemic and vaccinations and all kinds of things. Well, we're in the year 2022, and the latest gig, and I won't even tell you my particular feelings at the moment, but the latest gig is that, in quotation marks, a vaccination, which is really not, it's a shot that hopefully keeps people from getting really sick, but it doesn't stop people from getting ill with the COVID situation or any variant. But they're now approving it for children 5 years and younger. Now, I emphasize that with a loud voice because I think you can hear my bias against it. But again, 89 questions all around this particular issue. Wait a minute, we're divorced now. It's one thing if we're married and we're arguing with each other and we're fighting, but now we're divorced and there's custody on both sides. How do you navigate when one of the parents is in favor of a 5-year or younger child getting a vaccination, whatever they call this, and the other is adamantly opposed? So I'm going to pass the microphone to our hen. That's our high energy networking guru, wonderful Joe Applebaum, and he of 5 children. But by the way, if you'd be so kind, tell us what age. Let me just introduce wonderful Esty. Esty, we just began. Esty just came from being squashed in carpool. And Esty, as we mentioned, divorced with 5, and but still does carpool because that's part of the wonderful benefits of being a mother. So we're talking the questions that are coming in, flooding in, and there were 89 around this one particular subject. I'm going to repeat it now for everybody who's just joining later, and for Esty. And Joe is going to take the first stab at it. The first jab at it. is that now the CDC and the forces of the other side have said that children could or should, under the age of 5, get a vaccination. And the question comes up that when you, yes, thank you, that when you're divorced, it's one thing to argue with each other when you're married and scream and yell and throw things. But if you're divorced, you have equal custody. What if one of the parents is in favor of it and the other is adamantly opposed? How do you navigate with integrity? Joe Applebaum.
So what I would say is if the two parents are not aligned, right? There's two forces, they're not aligned. One parent wants one thing, another parent wants the other thing. Then you need someone else to come in between and help them decide what's best. And ultimately, if you have the children's doctor that you trust in all the issues of a children's life, then what I was recommended by not just lawyers, not the court, like everything, it's like, if you're not sure what the issue is, go ask the professionals what the issue is. Like if you're going to ask a doctor what their opinion is about anything regarding your kids, it's not just about you deciding something, it's about the person that you trust with the medical issues of the kid. So regardless if it's the wife, regardless if it's the husband, regardless of anybody else, when you have a problem, you go see a doctor. You don't like that opinion, you get a second opinion, you get a third opinion, you get a fourth opinion. But let's rely on the medical professionals that we trust with all the areas of our kids to make those decisions. And inside our agreement, it says it clearly there that if me and you cannot decide what on a specific medical procedure, then we both agree that this is the particular doctor that we both trust, that is in line with our values, that is going to help us decide what is best based on each kid's individual needs. Because for some kids, it might be more risky if they have allergies, if they have other situations. And for other kids, it might be less risky. But ultimately, regardless of the political side that you're in, we need to trust our professionals that we're trusting with everything else, like allergies and like all the other things that we're trusting them with, to be able to guide us and then take their word, hopefully, for doing the right thing, whatever that is. So that's really the best way to stop an issue from happening, because in your agreement, if you're finalize your agreement, it's going to say who gets final say, and then if you don't have final say, who can help you decide on final say.
So let me unpack something here, because I was unaware of what you said. I want to school you on one thing only, not because I'm politically correct, because I find it fascinating. Since you're a guy, I'm a guy, so it's sort of easier in this situation. It may even be that your doctor is a male, but I like how you said, well, let's go and talk to, the doctor and ask him. So
that's because my doctor happens to be a man.
I understand. I just want to put that out there for everybody.
Thank you for schooling me. I accept it.
That's right.
I accept it. Many doctors are women. It happens to be that my doctor is a man. So I said, let's ask him, because I was thinking about my own doctor.
Good. So I want to unpack something that I had no idea about, because I've not been in the situation. So you're telling us, the world, that in this document called a divorce settlement, that there actually is a unique piece in there regarding medical issues.
Yeah, not only medical issues, like what happens if, God forbid, some child gets into a situation where you have to decide if you should pull the plug or not. All those decisions are made in advance. And that's what I love about integrity in a divorce. Like in a marriage, often there's like a lot of he said, she said. Who needs to pay for this? Who needs to pay for that? What schools do we send them to? Like, what's going to happen when they get married? Who's going to pay for the tefillin? Like, what's like all this other stuff? You literally are writing everything that could possibly happen. And that's why often it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to get divorced with integrity, because you want to make sure that you're both on the same page. And if you're not agreeing in a marriage and it's not working, in divorce, you can have more integrity, because there's a 68-page agreement or a 65-page agreement, and literally covers line item by line item every possible thing that can happen till the kids are emancipated, and sometimes even beyond.
Again, just to harp on the subject with a nice tune, of course, is that I'm going to say these words: entering into marriage is a little more loosey-goosey, to use a street term, than getting divorced. You would think it would be the other way around, right? In other words, we're going to get married. We're going to plight our trust. Isn't that a great line, by the way? you're going to plight your troth. It really does sound ominous. When you're going to plight your troth with somebody, now granted, usually at a tender age, somewhere between 18 and 28, and still most brains aren't
Or in some cases, 38.
38, yeah, or in some cases 16. But the point is that it's easier, interestingly enough, to enter into marriage than to
Because
find.
marriage has something different. Marriage has love. And divorce often doesn't have love. It often has a lot of logic as opposed to heart. And it may have, like, hate and resentment and all this other stuff, but that's the stuff you got to heal before you get into an agreement. Because if not, then you're basically going to fight, 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 fight. And now it's time to be logical. Often people get married together and they're chemically attracted because of love, because of the feelings that we have. There's a book called Getting the Love You Want by Harville Hendrix. If you guys haven't heard of Harville Hendrix, I highly recommend Getting the Love You Want by Harville Hendrix. And he actually has an online course called Safe Conversations. And while I was trying to make my marriage work, I went pretty deep into all these modalities. And he actually has a framework for why you're sexually attracted to somebody, where you actually fall in love. It's actually chemical, and it has to do with your childhood wounds.
By the way, just to put it in perspective, we call it in the real world when you're in lust. Yes,
when you're in lust, when you're in love, there's like a cloud nine feeling that nothing can go wrong. And even if your parents tell you this makes no sense. And then so that's stage one. Stage two is often the power struggle, where you start living together and that kind of wears off. And you're like, hang on a second. Did you put up the toilet seat? Did you not put up the toilet seat? Did you just call my mother a what? What did you just call my mother? Like, all these different things come into play. And now you're in a power struggle. And often that power struggle can cause a lot of issues if we don't have the next level, which is having a conscious partnership. And often divorce is your conscious partnership.
Right.
Because now you have an agreement. And if you can't make an agreement in marriage, often you'll make that agreement in divorce. And that's why 50% of people get divorced, because they need to create integrity. They need to create connection for the sake of the kids. Because think about it. What's better? A divorce with integrity, or a marriage that's completely dysfunctional with two parents that are always arguing and there's never an agreement? A power struggle.
Okay, so there is a middle ground, which is just a dysfunctional marriage as opposed to constantly dysfunctional. Okay, let's go to wonderful Lori, the wife expert, who was on the edge of the D word, but she pulled herself back, and now she helps, thank God, many, many women either go through with divorce in integrity, hopefully, or regain marriage. Let's go to this question about medicine. How do you deal with one spouse says, my gosh, of course we're going to give my 4-year-old the shot, the jab. And the other side says, are you out of your mind? You're going to do what? You're going to put some foreign substance into a 4-year-old? We have no idea what it is. What do you say, Lori?
That's a really hard, when you said that, I was like, oh, thank God I don't have that situation. But I do know people that have. And the question is what Joe was just saying. He said, we'll go talk to my doctor. And when people are divorced, they don't have the same doctor usually. Everything kind of gets split. And well, my doctor says this and my doctor says this. And one thing you'll find is if you have a position where I want my kids vaxxed and the other person has a position of I don't want my kids vaxxed, both people can surf the internet and find specialists that will have their opinion, because that's what we do. We go look for like minds and we bring them in and we go, this is what my team says. We're going to do it this way. And the other person says, this is what my team says. And you still have a stalemate. So if it could be vaccinating or not vaccinating, could be a life and death situation. So you both can't sit there and go, well, if we give them the vax and they die, you're responsible. We'll just do something else, because if they die, there is no something else. So it's very dramatic and it's very tense. So making that decision really comes because two people really have a heart together, and talking about what is the worst case scenario. Oh, my child might die? Okay. And so if it follows that, then it's like, why can't we revisit this in a year or 2 years or 3 years or 4 years? Because if the worst case scenario happens, how will that parent feel who forced the vax situation? No one wants that.
Yeah,
And
this is fascinating, especially with the under 5-year-old. I mean, I'm full disclosure, it rips my heart out to think that people are doing this for under 5 years old. Okay, I'm on record, you know, call me what you want. I'm crazy, but I think it's absolutely wrong. However, there are many people that think I'm absolutely crazy and wrong. But I don't get it. So I'm hearing something that I didn't even think about, and I appreciate very much, Laura. You're right. Let's say the child is 4 years old. Well, the incidence of kids getting COVID and dying is so remote, so minuscule that, you know, maybe we can revisit this in a year and have that as an opportunity, using our larger integrity, and not yelling at the other person and saying, well, no, you're wrong, let's just go. But what do you think if we just revisit this in a year?
when technology catches up,
Yeah,
and maybe in a year they have
finding ways to speak to the other side in a gentle, loving, caring way, knowing really that you're really caring for the kid or kids. So very nice. I like this also very much. And what Joe mentioned about this idea of conscious partnership, you know, everybody knows the Maslow themes of being conscious, unconscious, conscious, unconscious, et cetera, et cetera. To be consciously involved in a partnership is, again, it's much like divorce with integrity. It's a breakthrough in marriage and hopefully even in life, which is a great segue into one of the most dynamic, life-living, loving people we know, wonderful Esty. Where do you come in on this particular issue? Again, not asking your opinion of vaxxers or not, but of medical issues. You know, maybe you can talk about vaccine if you want, because I don't know if you and your former spouse are on different sides of the issue.
You might be muted. We can't hear you.
How about now?
Now we can hear you.
That was so unusual. Esty was muted. Oh my gosh.
We are actually on opposite sides, but gratefully not rabidly on opposite sides. And, you know, where the everyday medical issue of like, you know, should my kid take Tylenol, or how often should they get their checkup, or should they have braces now or in 2 years? Like Lori said, like, okay, you know, let's lay out the consequences, you know, and like Joe said, we have it in the agreement. And I sing English this morning. I think I had to sing a couple of them, but I think that this becomes such a big deal because the polarization is so extreme and the consequences are so extreme for both sides. Pro-vaxxers feel that if you do not vax, you are putting your own life and other people's lives at risk. And anti-vaxxers feel that if you do, you are putting your own life and other people's lives at risk. It's pretty much the most extreme, right? You could be. It's a fascinating thing. I was in a disagreement with somebody about it, and I made the mistake of engaging. That was a mistake. I shouldn't have, especially because her and her husband are on opposite sides. And this is how they pulled me in. She's like, Esty, you're a very rational thinking person. My husband is not of my opinion. What's your opinion? And I'm like, oh, I'm going to help by bringing rationality. Yeah, right. You don't bring rationality to emotionality. It just doesn't work. And a few minutes into the conversation, I was like, you know what? I get it. You and I have different trust sources. My trust sources guide me in one direction, yours guide you in another. I could bring you every proof and every documentation and everything that backs up my opinion from all of the top sources in the world, sources that you hold by. and you won't believe me. And you could bring me all your stuff from all your sources, top sources in the world, biggest doctors, medical professionals, and I wouldn't believe you. Because my trust sources guided me one way, and that is where I stand. And yours got to do that. That's where you stand. And that's it. No one's going to change each other's minds at this point. We're a couple years into this. We're not moving unless, something happens to a person or they have a personal experience. But no one's going to intellectually sit down for a couple minutes or even a couple hours and change someone's mind when their trust sources are anchored. And so that being said, and sometimes you do have the provisions in your agreement and sometimes you don't, because even if you use boilerplate text, it's complicated. It's complicated, and the government rules are complicated, and the government is not only allowing, but actively encouraging this. I got a text. The government seems to have my cell phone number for my 14-year-old. So I got a text from the government last week. Hey, kid's name, wanted to offer you $50 if you haven't gotten the shot yet. Click here to book your appointment. I was like, you did what to my 14-year-old? Lucky that is my phone. Sorry.
Oh my God.
I'm a marketer, right? I'm a marketer by trade and a business consultant. And that to me is just
Sick.
Yeah, that really, whatever you think about vax and not vax and the medical issues, like you do not bypass me to my 14-year-old to bribe them with a serious medical procedure that we are still barely learning the effects of, whatever you think in any direction. As a parent, do not do that. Sorry, I'll go into full fury if we allow me, which we shouldn't. And so in the perspective of divorce, I don't think that the dangers or the conflict or anything is any different than when you're married for something like this, except that you might be lucky that you have it written in your agreement one way or another, that one person makes the decision or the other. You have to go to a specific person and consult, because typically either both parents have to agree, or one parent has jurisdiction, or a parent can sneak and do the thing that they want to do, or a parent can, if they're, again, for little kids, you can't really, but the older kids, they can like convince them of their way. And to me, the answer is just, it comes way before. It comes way before. It doesn't come at the time that you are arguing about this. It comes months and weeks and years before, in the way that you work things out when you're on opposite ends. I happen to be very lucky. My ex and I are not on the same, my camera's being weird, are not on the same page, but as in terms of, we weren't on the same page. And, but where kids are concerned, we both agree that the data is inconclusive as to how dangerous it can be. There is such a low risk for kids statistically, that there's no reason to do it. And the only thing I could say is that there's a difference between action and inaction, right? Mm-hmm. Like, and most divorce agreements do have that you need to get, again, either one parent's been given the rights, right, legal jurisdiction to do things or medical, and they both have to agree. But you're kind of typically more protected rather than less, because you have something written in place before an action is taken. And I just think it's such a big deal because it's so hot on both sides.
Now, let me put you on pause here, because each one of you is saying brilliant stuff. I mean, go back to this point that Joe mentioned about conscious partnership, and Lori about, let's wait a year, and you're now using that similar type of idea of action versus inaction, and being able to understand that, first of all, these are things that are not happening in the moment, that things weeks before or months even.
For years. How do you solve an issue? How did you when you were married? How do you when you're divorced? This is such an extreme one because it feels like life or death on both ends of the spectrum.
Right.
That's why it's such a big deal. But how do you work at an issue when you're at opposite ends of...
Okay, so again, let's go back to our theme, divorce with integrity. Yeah. In other words, we are now conscious beings. And to go back to something that Joe mentioned before, in the with stars in your eyes getting married, there is love, lust, attraction, whatever the issues are, the cloud 9. Well, the genius of this is now we're on cloud 13, because you see, the beauty of divorce with integrity, if we can pull this off, is that we now become far more conscious of ourselves and therefore our spouse in all issues. In other words, if I'm going to be truly living with integrity, I have to respect the other person. If I don't respect the other person, no offense to anybody here, you're not living with integrity. I mean, I'm making these statements. You don't have to agree with me. But I'm saying part of living with integrity in oneself is that I will respect you, again, barring real, depressive activities that warrants being put away or having, chemical imbalances and such like that. But in the normal course of human events, when two parties have decided to share responsibility for their children, et cetera, and that proceeding is called a divorce, we want to do it with the highest level of integrity, because on a selfish level, I'm becoming the best me possible. If I'm the best me possible, I can actually look at you, the other, as somebody real, not just with the eyes, well, we're in love. And that is so liberating and, in my humble opinion, so beneficial for the children, no matter how many you have, whether you're 1 or 10 or more, and how old, it doesn't matter how old they are. But when you say to us now on this program, and thousands of people, thank God, are watching, listening, I mean, I'm telling you, I've heard of stories, but you're telling us that you got the text. The government.
I have a screenshot of it. I not only saved the text, but in case I should lose it, I took a screenshot and backed it up.
Can I say something?
Yes, please, Lori.
Okay, so you know how you go to the doctor and the doctor or the school, it'll say on forms you fill out, child cell phone. Never, ever do I give out that child cell phone, ever. It's always my number, my number, my number. I lie, because there's no way in heck is anyone going to text my kid outside of the realm of me. When they're 18, okay. But now, under the age of 18, do not, as a parent, ever at the doctor's office or anything to do with the kid's school, even if it's their coach, fill out this form. If you get it, then you send it to your son or daughter. That's totally. Just my rule because of what happened to you. It's happened to me too. And I'm like, no. Yeah. We have control.
That emotion. Yes.
You can also put technology on your kids' phones that don't allow them to receive things from other people. There are technologies out there that you're able to install on children's phones to protect them. So, and part of the agreement is that you can put that technology in, and who's in charge of that like all that goes.
I want to see your agreement. I must have every detail. I should have looked at yours before I did mine.
I'm married. I want that now too.
I feel like yours is way more detailed than mine.
You're very lucky if you can get one doctor. I know you mentioned, Laurie, that sometimes there are multiple doctors, or maybe Barry or somebody mentioned that. For us, we're really lucky that we just basically are agreeing on the schools, agreeing on the doctors, agreeing on the stuff. The more you can agree on, oftentimes there's a disagreeable in a relationship. Oftentimes there's one person that's usually a little more agreeable and a person less agreeable. What I want whoever's listening to this, be more agreeable if you can. Obviously, don't put your kids' health at risk, but try to be more agreeable on all the things that you can be agreeable on. Because there are going to be things that you're going to have to put your foot down on. So pick those things to be the major things. I know you guys mentioned medical issues. That's really major. Remarrying. I don't know if you can have a say in who gets remarried or not and how they get remarried.
We'll get to that question.
The medical issue concept is a big concept. So if you are getting divorced, or you need to redo your agreement somehow, and every agreement is you can renegotiate an agreement. They won't necessarily agree to renegotiate, but if there's something that lacks clarity, it's worth it to, instead of fighting about who should decide, fight to fix the agreement. Don't fight who should decide, fight to fix the agreement because the agreement should decide. And if the agreement's not clear, the agreement needs to be rewritten to become clearer. That's the whole concept of what's going on with our world today, is that we have a constitution that is not clear, and there's amendments that are not clear, and there's like lack of clarity. If everyone can agree to have an agreement, and this is the agreement that we all agree to, then we have integrity. But if we don't, then there's a lack of integrity. There's a lack of like, oh, I say this, you say this, I say this, you say this. There needs to be some form of somebody that you can rely on, that you can have at the end of the day, something that you could look on that you both actually agree. If you can't decide, somebody needs to decide. A decision needs to be made at the end of the day, whether it's yay or nay. So you have to have somebody that you could rely on, that you both trust. And if you're on two different worlds that you both don't trust, you're going to have issues. There's going to be major issues. So try to be the agreeable person. You can only control yourself at the end. This is what I always say. I can only control me. So if I can control me, how can I make sure that I'm able to be more agreeable and again, not necessarily give in, but share my values, share my point of view, make sure that I do it in a respectful way, and try to be agreeable as much as you can. That's what I say to make things work.
I want to unpack some things here that you mentioned, Joe, and I think you're speaking for a lot of people. So you use the word agreeable many times, which is very important. And again, I think that this goes to the evolution of the being, the adultification, as it were. I'm going to get a little bit edgy here. When I was 14 years old, I remember the first time I asked my father, "What does it mean an adult bookstore?" And he laughed just like you are. He said he sort of couldn't understand what I was. He didn't want to know how to explain it to me and such like that. Okay, but the point is that it's an oxymoron, right? And if that's what adults do, that's an oxymoron. It's like going to the supermarket and saying in the old days, "Oh, the health food aisle." That was the rest of the food, not. Okay, so let's go to the point of being agreeable. Part of the definition of divorce with integrity is that I am becoming more clear on me. And part of that is learning to use my agreeable muscle. My agreeable muscle got withered in times of marriage when there was arguments, because arguments and throwing things, whether they're verbal assaults or using the salt shaker.
Throw me out the window a towel, please. Throw me out the window a towel.
Yeah.
Throw me out the window.
Yeah. So, but those were less agreeable times. You becoming more agreeable is to your advantage. Think of it that way. It's to your advantage. You don't have to be stepped on. Of course, there are times when one must make a stand.
And that's where boundaries come in, Barry. Boundaries are really important. So boundaries go along with agreements side by side.
Very good. That gives rise to the words that we're trying to utilize in our discussion here to help a lot of people, especially ourselves, in the idea of clarity. Really, what divorce with integrity, if there is a synonym, it is clarity. It is being, you said something, Joe, was very interesting. And I'm going to be very personal for a moment, only because you brought it up recently also on LinkedIn and such. It has to do with people's weight. And you said, the only one I can control is myself. Well, oftentimes when people look at their physical being, the reality is they can't control themselves. In other words, I wasn't in control of what I eat or what I was thinking or what I was acting, et cetera, drinking. I mean, those are the normal difficulties that people face, right? Alcoholics Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, Sex Anonymous, blah, 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 et cetera. So when you do begin to get control of oneself and your own boundaries get set up in your life, this is where it really helps either your current spouse, future spouse, or past spouse. It doesn't matter. What you're doing is you're becoming the best you, which helps everybody. So I just love these words that you're using, because you're not just using them as words. You found them in your own life. Being agreeable, being more clear, trusting, and having boundaries in your life. Lori, I mean, you work with women that are really, really on the edge of stuff. How do you work with people when it comes to these issues of, again, the medical part or trusting somebody as a third party, etc.?
Say that again, Barry. So
Okay.
there's a lot here. I don't know which direction to
there's a
go.
lot. I
I
mean,
could go many ways.
you know what I like about this? That this is real. These are 4 people speaking with each other, not talking over each other, and we're writing little things in the chat and we're having a lot of fun and sharing with a lot of other people, because this stuff makes a difference to people. This stuff makes a difference. So Laura, you deal with women who are in the midst of evolving. Let's call it that. They don't know what to do. Get divorced, not get divorced. How do I become better so that I don't have to get divorced? Or if I do want to get divorced, what do I do? Clarity. Being agreeable. Gee, I don't want to be agreeable. I'm a doormat. Well, yeah, but you didn't set up boundaries. In other words, what do you say to people when they come to you?
Yeah, that's so interesting because I have rules on boundaries. I have rules about agreeing. You can agree with somebody because when someone says something and you immediately go, well, I don't agree with that, or no, it's not going to be like that. Immediately you're saying, let's argue.
Right.
And I don't agree with that. I use in my life, and what I teach is we never say the word no. And if you can just take that into your little tool belt and say to yourself, I'm never going to say no again. I'm going to use other words. So there's this trick. I used to do stand-up comedy for 20 years, which is why I'm so funny, right? Just kidding.
I was going to say, hello, it's coming in. Now you know why Lori is the wife expert, because she can laugh at all this stuff and make jokes. Okay.
So I tend to take things lightly because, I mean, if you think about it, I'm 50 and in another 40 years, I'm not going to be here anymore. Does all this really matter? Let's take a practical look at everything. So going back to yes. So in my career, I did improv. I worked with Second City, and there's this trick called yes and. Ready? So it goes yes and. So somebody says, we're getting our kids vaccinated tomorrow. You can say, yes, and that's such a great idea. And I love that you're agreeing with me that we need to keep our kids healthy. However, I, as a woman, feel scared that maybe something bad might happen to our son in a couple of years. Do we really think we should do this now? So you can agree with somebody and then not agree with them, and then share your feelings about why you don't agree with them. It's okay to do that. But if you go straight into a conversation with the word no, it's not going to go well. So,
yes, and
right. But then on the thing about boundaries is, when people put up boundaries, they put up boundaries against other people. Like, I have a boundary against my husband. He is not allowed to do these things. Well, you can't control your husband. You can only control yourself. So when people put up boundaries, you put up boundaries on yourself. And I don't have a problem with that. I think it's great. My boundary is when my husband calls at 9 o'clock and I'm going to bed, I'm going to say, hey, I got to go to sleep now. I can't listen to complaining, but I'm not going to say I can't listen to complaining. I'm going to just tell him, boy, yes, I'm really tired. I need to go to bed, because that's my boundary. He does not need to know I put a boundary on him that I'm not going to talk to him after 9 o'clock. That's on me. If I tell him that, he's not going to like that. Boundaries are personal, that you make to yourself. So I'm done.
I want to say something about safety. Can I say, Barry, is it okay if I say something about safety? What ends up happening is many of us have conversations with people, and we end up getting those no's. We end up getting shamed. We end up getting blamed. We end up getting yelled at. And then we don't have safety as a result of that. And if you can't have a safe conversation with someone, if you can't be okay with hearing somebody else's perspective, then you're going to have a tremendous amount of conflict, and you're not going to be able to get past it. So that's a skill that we all need to learn. And Harville Hendrix actually has a course on having safe conversations, because the safety that you have in a relationship, the trust that you didn't have in marriage that maybe you can have now in divorce, that can be created, that can be manufactured. And it's actually a skill that you need to learn, how to create safety for the other person, so that they don't feel like if you want to share your opinion that you're questioning their intelligence or something like that. So I just wanted to make it really, really clear that if you're listening to this and you don't have the skill to have a safe conversation with someone, regardless if they have it or don't have that skill, you can create that environment where you create safety for them to share whatever they want to share. And then you can educate them and inspire them and guide them to making the right decision together with you. And we've all had conflict in our lives. And through me learning these skills, it helped me be able to use more me statements instead of you statements. And like there's a lot of powerful ways to be able to communicate in a way we don't automatically trigger somebody by not shaming them, blaming them, yelling at them, calling them a liar, calling them names. It carries a lot of energy. So I just want to say that. And also, it's not what you say often, it's how you say it as well. So we just have to be careful and make sure that we're creating safety. That's all I got to say.
Thank you, Joe. Yes. And Esty.
I've been waiting so patiently. I get so many gold stars for today. Oh my gosh. I'm going to give them to myself. I've been so good. There's so many things I wanted to say the whole time. I'm like, I was respectful.
Tell us, wonderful Esty, from your perspective, the idea of boundaries. Again, we'll get a little personal with your permission. And if not, you'll tell me. You and your husband were in marriage in a very religious environment. Doesn't matter the religion, but a very deeply religious environment. And now, not so. In other words, from your perspective, not. From his perspective, he still is.
Yeah.
And the ability for each one of you to respect the other's position and to make sure that the kids see those two positions as respectful. How do you set up the boundaries so that people can live, like Joe's saying, in safety? In other words, to have conversations, true conversation, which gets to communication.
Yeah. It's a great question. So I'm going to go back to the thing I said before a little bit about the medical stuff, which is that it doesn't start in that moment, right? It starts years before, and it's very much who you are. As an example, my oldest daughter is in, the Beis Yaakov system, ultra religious, and I don't remember what the moment was. I don't remember if I was wearing something that didn't really conform to the rules or what. And she just said to me, she's like, "Ma, you do you, I'll do me." And I'm like, I taught you that over the decades, right? That's who I am. You do you, I'll do me. I taught all my children that it's who I am. So if I am that person where you do you and I'll do me, and you have that frame, and if you don't have it from years before, start today. Yeah, you can't start yesterday, but you can start today. At the beginning of the divorce, I remember I was just starting to, come out as irreligious. And I was very nervous. I was very, very nervous about the repercussions in the divorce, with my children, with the community, in my business, and everything. And I was doing a walking meditation in a very cool hike trail. And at the end of the meditation, I was really to me, meditation is prayer, right? I'm talking to God out loud in my head. It doesn't matter. And I said to God, I'm like, just show me what to do. Like, I don't know what to do. I'm nervous. I'm really scared about what's going to happen now. And God is just the coolest. Okay. I think God is the coolest. God and I, we talk every day, most of the day, all day. And so, but God doesn't talk to you like a human does, right? With vocalized sounds necessarily. Sometimes, yes. Sometimes a human will say something, you're like, oh, that was the answer to my question. And so I'm coming down the hill. I know exactly where I was. I'm coming down the hill and I see to my left. And again, I'm giving you the stereotype, not from a racist perspective, but I want you to understand the stereotype. I see this big black guy and he's wearing this t-shirt. It says, "Be you, they'll adjust." And it was just so incongruous. Be you, they'll adjust. Now, if it was like some hippy dippy person with a bunch of tattoos and earrings, you'd be like, okay, that person was wearing that shirt and that's cool. But it was so incongruous. It got my attention because the look of the man wearing it didn't match the words on the shirt. It really grabbed me. And I'm like, those words materializing for me, did he actually put that on this morning? Like it wasn't a match to the human. Like people just look, again, I'm stereotyping, because that's what marketers do. It's how we live. And it grabbed me so much. To me, it felt like such a clear message from the universe. I wanted to go and like hug the man and be like, thank you for that. That's just what I needed today. Be you, they'll adjust. And that is what I carried for the years since. Be me, they'll adjust. I'm not here to impose on anybody. I said this in a previous one. My house is fully kosher. I was talking to my ex last week, and I think I even mentioned that to him, right? And not only is my house fully kosher, it is super ultra kosher at the highest possible standard. There are many people who keep full Orthodox kosher without the extra stringencies that my ex and I used to keep, that I still keep in my house for my kids. And if there's ever something that's regular kosher in my house that doesn't hold of the extra stringencies, I'll let them know. You can eat this if you want. Everything's kosher. This is not the super ultra kosher. That's your choice. And my ex is aware of that. And to me, that's my fundamental respect. My boundaries are mine, but the boundaries that I brought my children up with, right, that are important to them because I taught them that. And I put them in those schools and I believed it completely. I should now start stepping on those. It doesn't feel respectful to me. That doesn't feel respectful. I do me, you do you.
This is quite enlightening. The genius of what we have here, and I truly, deeply appreciate your time, your energy, your insights, your input, as do many, many other people. I had a number of questions I told you, 89 questions just about the vaxing and things like that. We got over 100 questions about getting remarried, but we don't have time. We'll have to do that next time. Because it's an interesting question and dilemma about getting remarried. Who is one, Can
I say one word about remarriage?
Yeah, wait a minute. Then you're not going to say what. You can speak.
I'll just say one word: prenup. That's all I'll say.
Freedom.
Prenup. P-R-E-N-U-P. P-R-E-N-U-P. And you're going to make an acronym out of that. That's super positive and super full of joy.
I will find, God willing, by the next time. Yeah,
prenup.
Prenup. Yes.
I want to add one thing about what you asked me, and also about all the other stuff we were talking about, which is what I put in the chat, which is law of balance. The more polarized you are about something, the more you invite a polarized response. And that's, it's funny, I didn't know yes and was a thing. I thought I made it up about like a couple of years ago. I just thought of it myself. I hadn't heard it anywhere. So I love that I'm in synchronicity with a lot of other people who've been teaching it for a long time. When you say yes and, it's disarming because you've unpolarized. You've gone and stood on the same side as the other person, and now you're walking with them instead of against them. If you look at it that you are on two opposite sides of the rope and you start pulling your side, the other person's going to pull their side. That's just what's going to happen. But if you are on the side of your rope and you're on one side and they're on the other side, and you just start pulling yourself toward that person, that's very different than this tug of war, and you can initiate that. I don't care how rabidly horrific, horrible, abusive, psychotic the other person is and your opinion of them. You have the option to hold your end of the rope and pull as hard as you can, or see how you can walk toward. See what is the common ground, right? I love what Lori said, right? Oh, you want the kids vaxxed tomorrow? Yes, and I'm scared. I'm so glad we both agree that the health of our children is so important, because that's clearly what we're agreeing on, right? I think that's really important. You think that's really important. Where do we agree?
This is wonderful too. to conclude our hour on these high notes of walking towards one another and using the word agree, we will segue into prenup next time. And God willing, I'll have a great acronym for it. And then we can all use these ideas that we've that we've articulated about clarity, trust, agreement, boundaries, safety, the positive aspects. And just remember these two words: yes, and. Because life is a great comedy. So Dante said it's called the Divine Comedy. And if you don't know that book, you should actually look it up. So here we come to the top of our hour. I'd like to do two things. Number one, of course, is give a hug to us and to everybody watching. And again, leave everybody with a blessing until next time, which God willing will be in just a few weeks, be the second Tuesday of every month for the rest of your lives. And we'll say HUG, remember, stands for heartfelt, unlimited giving. Are we ready, everybody? 1, 2, 3. Go forth, live exuberantly, spread the seeds of joy, happiness, peace, and love. Best wishes. Bye.